The Broken Clock Mystery. Detective Peter Anderson stood in the dimly lit living room of an upscale Manhattan apartment, staring at the shattered remnants of a once elegant antique clock. The timepiece lay frozen at precisely 10:15 p.m., its glass face cracked like a spider's web. Blood splatter dotted the mahogany floor beneath it, a grim reminder that time had, quite literally, stopped for the victim. Nicole Bennett, forensic expert and Peter's longtime partner, knelt beside the lifeless body of Jonathan Wells, a wealthy businessman with more enemies than friends. Her gloved hands carefully examined the crime scene, her sharp eyes scanning for clues hidden beneath the surface. "The time on the clock," Nicole murmured, standing up. "It's too perfect, Peter. Someone wanted us to see this." Peter rubbed his stubbled chin, eyes narrowing. "You're right. Whoever did this wanted to send a message. The question is, why 10:15? Their investigation led them deep into Wells' business dealings, revealing a tangled web of deceit, betrayal, and long-buried secrets. As they dug deeper, they discovered that Wells had been involved in a high-stakes real estate deal, one that had left several people financially ruined. Late one night, while poring over Wells' financial records in their office, Peter and Nicole stumbled upon a cryptic note hidden within his files. It read, "Time is running out. 10:15, the bridge." Nicole leaned in, eyes widening. "The Brooklyn Bridge. Do you think it's a drop-off point?" Peter's jaw tightened. Only one way to find out. That night, they staked out the bridge, concealed in the shadows. At exactly 10:15 p.m., a black sedan pulled up. A hooded figure stepped out, placing a briefcase on the pavement. Before Peter could make a move, a gunshot echoed through the night, and the figure crumpled to the ground. Rushing forward, Nicole checked the person's pulse. Dead. Shot with precision. Peter opened the briefcase, revealing stacks of cash and a flash drive. This isn't just about money. There's something bigger at play. Returning to their office, they analyzed the flash drive's contents. It contained encrypted files, blueprints, and names. Lots of names. High-profile politicians, law enforcement officers, and corporate executives were all connected in a vast conspiracy that extended beyond anything they had anticipated. Nicole sighed. "This goes deeper than we thought. Wells must have been blackmailing them." Before they could celebrate their breakthrough, their office door burst open. Armed men in tactical gear stormed in, forcing Peter and Nicole to dive for cover. Bullets riddled their desks as they fought back, using years of training to outmaneuver their attackers. In the chaos, Nicole managed to slip the flash drive into her pocket. "We need to get out of here." Peter nodded, leading her through a secret exit they had prepared for situations just like this. Emerging into the rainy streets of New York, they disappeared into the crowd, their hearts pounding. "What now?" Nicole asked, shivering from the cold and adrenaline. Peter glanced at her, determination burning in his eyes. "We find out who's behind this and we take them down." Their search led them to a powerful syndicate known as the Dominion, a clandestine organization with its roots in organized crime and political corruption. The deeper they delved, the more they realized how far the Dominion's influence stretched. It wasn't just about Wells anymore. It was about justice for countless victims. Their journey took them across the city, from abandoned warehouses in the Bronx to luxurious penthouses in Midtown, each location holding another piece of the puzzle. Along the way, they encountered allies and enemies alike. Informants with shaky allegiances, crooked cops on the syndicate's payroll, and shadowy figures who seemed to know their every move. One night, after a particularly close call, Nicole confronted Peter. "We can't do this alone, Peter. We need help." Peter hesitated but nodded. "I know just the person." Enter Jackson Grant, a former intelligence operative turned underground investigator. With his resources and knowledge of covert operations, Jackson provided them with crucial insights into the Dominion's operations. Their leader, Jackson revealed, is known only as the Clockmaker. Everything ties back to him. He controls the city's flow of money, power, and crime. Armed with this knowledge, Peter and Nicole set a trap. They infiltrated the Dominion's headquarters, posing as disgruntled business partners looking to cut a deal. The tension in the room was palpable as they sat face to face with the clockmaker himself, a cold, calculating man with an unsettling smile. "You think you've won, detective," the clockmaker said smoothly, "but time is always on my side." A silent signal from Nicole, and all hell broke loose. The room erupted into gunfire, smoke filling the air. Peter and Nicole fought their way through, finally confronting the clockmaker in a tense showdown. In the end, it came down to a single bullet. Peter's aim was true, and the clockmaker fell, his reign of terror finally over. As the dust settled, Nicole turned to Peter with a tired smile. "We did it, but at what cost?" Peter looked at the broken clock they had recovered from the crime scene, now sitting on his desk. Justice isn't always pretty, but it's worth it. With the Dominion dismantled and the city safe once more, Peter and Nicole knew their work was far from over. The broken clock had started a chain of events they could never have imagined, but time, as always, marched on.
Ritual shadows. The icy wind whispered through the cobblestone streets of Boston as Detective Nancy Harper adjusted her scarf. The call had come through just before dawn, yanking her out of a restless sleep. A murder, unusual in its brutality, had been discovered in an abandoned church on the city's outskirts. The victim's identity was still unknown, but the scene was already drawing whispers of something beyond the ordinary. Her partner, Detective Oscar Hayes, leaned against their car, his tall frame silhouetted by the rising sun. His expression was grim as he held out a steaming cup of coffee. "Morning," he said, though there was nothing good about it. "Morning," Nancy replied, taking the cup gratefully. "What do we know?" "Not much yet," Oscar said. "But word is, it's something we haven't seen before." They made their way to the church, a decaying structure with stained glass windows fractured like spider webs. The air inside was heavy with the metallic tang of blood. Crime scene tape sectioned off the altar, where the victim lay sprawled in a grotesque tableau. Candles surrounded the body, their wax pooled and hardened like tears on the floor. Nancy's stomach churned. The victim, a man in his 30s, was positioned with his arms outstretched, his wrists bound with crimson ropes. Symbols were carved into his chest, their jagged lines intersecting in a pattern that seemed almost deliberate, ritualistic. "What the hell is this?" Nancy murmured. Oscar knelt by the body, careful not to disturb the scene. "It looks like some kind of ritual," he said. "But what kind? I have no idea." The medical examiner, Dr. Eleanor Vance, stepped forward, her gloved hands meticulous as she pointed to the carvings. "These symbols, they're not random," she said. "They're precise. Someone knew exactly what they were doing." Nancy's gaze drifted to the symbols, her mind racing. She'd seen something like this before, in an old case file from a decade ago. But that killer had been caught, hadn't he? The investigation moved quickly, but answers were scarce. The victim's fingerprints yielded no matches in the system. The symbols remained a mystery, even after consultation with experts in ancient languages and occult practices. Nancy and Oscar combed through every lead, every fragment of evidence, but the pieces refused to fit. Then came the second murder. This time, the body was found in a dilapidated warehouse near the harbor. The scene was eerily similar, symbols carved into flesh, candles arranged with ritualistic precision. But there was one chilling difference. A message scrawled in blood on the wall read, "The shadows will rise." "What does that mean?" Oscar asked, his voice edged with frustration. Nancy's eyes narrowed. "It means we're dealing with something bigger than we thought." Days turned into weeks, and the murders continued. Each victim was left in a public space, their bodies displayed like macabre art installations. The city was gripped with fear, the press dubbing the killer the ritualist. But for Nancy and Oscar, the case became something personal. It wasn't just about catching a killer. It was about unraveling a conspiracy that seemed to stretch beyond the bounds of logic. Their breakthrough came unexpectedly. A name surfaced during their research. The Order of Tenebris, an ancient sect rumored to have dabbled in dark rituals. Most historians dismissed it as myth, but Nancy's gut told her otherwise. If this order is real, Nancy said, pacing in their cramped office, then they might be the key to all of this. Oscar frowned. You really think a centuries-old cult is behind these murders? I don't know, Nancy admitted. But it's the only lead we have. The investigation took them deep into Boston's underbelly, to places most people avoided. They questioned informants, followed paper trails, and pieced together a history that was as disturbing as it was elusive. The Order of Tenebris, they learned, had been linked to similar murders in the past, each series of killings ending abruptly without resolution. It's like they vanish, Nancy said, poring over old police reports. Every time the heat gets too intense, they disappear. Or they're silenced, Oscar said darkly. Their persistence paid off when they uncovered a hidden meeting place, an abandoned library on the edge of the city. The building was a relic of another era, its walls lined with dusty tomes, and its air thick with mildew. Nancy's heart pounded as they descended into the basement, flashlights cutting through the darkness. What they found there was beyond anything they'd imagined. The room was a shrine to something ancient and sinister. Symbols identical to those carved into the victims adorned the walls, and an altar stood at the center, its surface stained with blood. This is it, Nancy whispered. This is where it all happens. But before they could investigate further, a sound froze them in their tracks, footsteps echoing in the darkness. Nancy and Oscar drew their weapons, their eyes scanning the shadows. A figure emerged, cloaked and masked, holding a dagger that gleamed ominously in the flashlight beam. You don't belong here, the figure said, their voice distorted. Drop the weapon, Oscar commanded. The figure laughed, a chilling sound that reverberated through the room. You've seen too much. The shadows demand your silence. Before they could react, more figures appeared, their movements swift and coordinated. Nancy and Oscar fought back, their training kicking in. But they were outnumbered. Just as the situation seemed hopeless, a shot rang out, scattering the cultists. Backup had arrived, called in by Oscar's emergency signal. The room erupted into chaos as officers stormed the basement, subduing the cultists and securing the scene. Nancy and Oscar, battered but alive, watched as the ritualistic nightmare was dismantled piece by piece. In the days that followed, the investigation revealed the full extent of the Order's operations. Dozens of members were arrested, and evidence linked the group to murders spanning decades. But the mastermind behind the killings remained elusive, their identity a haunting mystery. As Nancy and Oscar stood on the steps of the courthouse, watching the media frenzy below, Nancy couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. We stopped them this time, Oscar said. That's what matters. Nancy nodded, but her mind was already racing, piecing together the fragments of a puzzle she wasn't sure she wanted to solve. Because somewhere in the shadows, she knew, the true threat was still waiting.